The arrival. The skies over New York City darkened as the massive Zarkath warship descended through the atmosphere. Its hull, a deep obsidian that seemed to absorb light, stretched for miles across the horizon. Smaller craft swarmed around it like angry hornets, their energy weapons cutting through Earth's defensive fighters with terrifying ease. On the ground, Dr. Samantha Chen stared up at the alien invasion force with a mix of awe and terror. As one of Earth's leading xenobiologists, she had long dreamed of first contact with an alien species. But not like this. Never like this. Dr. Chen. A voice snapped her out of her daze. It was Colonel James Harper, his uniform dusty and torn. "We need to evacuate now. The perimeter won't hold much longer." Samantha nodded, forcing herself to look away from the apocalyptic scene above. She followed the colonel through the chaos of the makeshift command center, set up in the basement of the American Museum of Natural History. Scientists and military personnel rushed about, gathering what equipment and data they could before the inevitable retreat. "What's the situation, Colonel?" Samantha asked, as they hurried down a corridor lined with ancient artifacts, now likely to become relics of a dead civilization. Harper's jaw clenched. "Bad. We've lost contact with most major cities. The Zarkath are systematically taking out our communications, power grids, and military installations. It's a textbook invasion strategy, executed with terrifying efficiency." They reached a heavy steel door, which Harper quickly unlocked with his biometric scan. Inside was a small, cluttered lab that Samantha had been using as her workspace since the invasion began 3 days ago. "Pack only what's essential," Harper ordered. "We leave in 5 minutes." Samantha nodded, her mind racing as she grabbed her tablet and portable drives. She hesitated for a moment before snatching up a small cylindrical container from her workbench. Inside was a sample of Zarkath biology, a scrap of tissue recovered from a downed fighter pilot. It was quite possibly the most valuable scientific specimen on the planet. As she worked, the building shook violently. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the distant sound of explosions grew closer. "They're pushing into Manhattan," Harper said grimly, checking his tactical display. "We're out of time." They rushed back into the corridor, joining a stream of personnel heading for the emergency exit. Samantha clutched her precious cargo close, her mind whirling with possibilities. There had to be a way to fight back, to find a weakness in the seemingly invincible Zarkath war machine. The group emerged into the cool night air, greeted by the sight of New York in flames. Zarkath fighters screamed overhead, their energy weapons carving fiery swaths through the city's iconic skyline. In the distance, the Statue of Liberty stood defiant, though for how much longer, Samantha couldn't say. "This way," Harper directed, leading them towards a convoy of armored vehicles. "We're falling back to the underground facility in the Catskills." As they piled into the transports, a deafening roar filled the air. Samantha looked up to see a massive Zarkath warship positioning itself directly over Central Park. A sickly green light began to build at its center. "Go, go, go," Harper shouted to the drivers. The convoy lurched into motion just as the alien ship unleashed its weapon. A column of emerald energy slammed into the heart of Manhattan, vaporizing everything in its path. The shockwave hit moments later, nearly overturning their vehicle. Samantha watched in horror as her beloved city, her home, was reduced to ash and rubble in seconds. Tears streamed down her face, but her mind was already racing ahead. They needed to understand the enemy, to find a way to fight back. And the key to that understanding might just be in the sample she clutched in her hands. As the convoy sped away from the ruins of New York, Samantha made a silent vow. Humanity would survive this. They would find a way to defeat the Zarkath, no matter the cost. And she would dedicate every waking moment to that goal. The journey to the Catskills facility was tense and silent. Occasional flashes of light in the sky marked ongoing battles between Earth's dwindling air forces and the seemingly endless swarms of Zarkath fighters. Each flash felt like another nail in humanity's coffin. They arrived at the hidden base just before dawn. Nestled deep within the mountains, it had been designed as a last resort fallback point in case of global catastrophe. Now, it seemed, that catastrophe had arrived. As they descended into the underground complex, Samantha was struck by the grim determination on the faces around her. Scientists, soldiers, and civilians alike moved with purpose, each playing their part in humanity's desperate bid for survival. General Elena Rodriguez, the highest-ranking military officer left on the East Coast, greeted them as they entered the command center. Her weathered face bore the strain of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "Report, Colonel," she barked. Harper stepped forward. "New York has fallen, ma'am. As have most major cities across the globe. We managed to evacuate key personnel and some civilians, but casualties are extensive." Rodriguez nodded, her expression unreadable. "And you, Dr. Chen, what do you have for us?" Samantha held up the cylinder containing the Zarkath tissue sample. "Hope, General. I have hope." Over the next few hours, Samantha worked feverishly in the base's advanced laboratory, analyzing the alien tissue at a molecular level. The Zarkath biology was fascinatingly complex, with structures unlike anything seen in Earth's life forms. But as she dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. "General, Colonel, you need to see this," Samantha called out, her voice tight with excitement. Rodriguez and Harper hurried over to her workstation, where a holographic display showed a rotating model of a Zarkath cell. "What are we looking at, Doctor?" Rodriguez asked. Samantha highlighted a specific structure within the cell. "This is an organelle unique to Zarkath biology. It seems to be integral to their ability to process energy, both for their own bodies and, I suspect, for their technology." Harper leaned in, his brow furrowed. "And how does this help us?" A small smile played at the corners of Samantha's lips. "Because this organelle is incredibly sensitive to a specific frequency of electromagnetic radiation, one that's harmless to Earth life, but potentially devastating to the Zarkath." Understanding dawned on Rodriguez's face. "Are you saying we have a way to hurt them?" Samantha nodded. "More than hurt them, General. If we can develop a weapon that emits this specific frequency at high enough power, we might be able to incapacitate their entire force. Their ships, their weapons, even the Zarkath themselves, all could be vulnerable." For the first time since the invasion began, a flicker of hope appeared in Rodriguez's eyes. "How quickly can you develop a prototype?" "With the resources here, a few days for a small-scale test device. Scaling up to weapons that could affect their ships would take longer." Harper interjected. "We may not have that kind of time, Doctor. Our last reports indicate the Zarkath are consolidating their hold on major population centers. They'll start expanding to secondary targets soon." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, weighing their options. Finally, she spoke. "You have 48 hours, Dr. Chen. After that, we'll have to risk a field test, ready or not." She turned to Harper. "Colonel, I want you to start organizing strike teams. Small, mobile units that can deploy Dr. Chen's device as soon as it's ready." Both Samantha and Harper nodded, understanding the gravity of the task before them. As the others left to carry out their orders, Samantha turned back to her work with renewed determination. The fate of humanity now rested on her ability to turn this theoretical weakness into a practical weapon. The pressure was immense, but she forced herself to focus on the task at hand. Hour after hour, she worked tirelessly, refining her analysis and collaborating with the engineering team to design the prototype device. Coffee cups piled up around her workstation, and her eyes burned from staring at screens and holographic models. But she pushed on, driven by the knowledge that every minute counted. Outside the protected bubble of the underground base, reports trickled in of Zarkath atrocities. Entire cities subjected to forced labor, dissenters publicly executed, and worse. Each new horror only fueled Samantha's resolve. As the 48-hour deadline approached, Samantha and her team put the finishing touches on their creation. It wasn't much to look at, a boxy device about the size of a microwave oven, bristling with antennas and emitters. But if their calculations were correct, it could be the key to humanity's survival. General Rodriguez and Colonel Harper arrived just as they were powering up the prototype for its first full test. "Is it ready, Doctor?" Rodriguez asked, tension evident in her voice. Samantha nodded, her hand hovering over the activation switch. "As ready as it can be, given the time constraints. All simulations indicate it should work, but we won't know for sure until we test it on actual Zarkath." Harper finished. "Exactly." Samantha took a deep breath. "Here goes nothing." She flipped the switch. The device hummed to life, a soft blue glow emanating from its core. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. "What's going on?" Rodriguez demanded. A technician at a nearby console called out, "Ma'am, we're detecting a massive energy surge from the surface. It's a Zarkath ship. They've found us." The color drained from Harper's face. "How?" "This facility is shielded, hidden. It doesn't matter now." Rodriguez cut him off. She turned to Samantha, her eyes hard. "Doctor, it looks like we'll be field testing your device sooner than expected. Is it mobile?" Samantha nodded, already moving to disconnect the prototype from its power source. "Yes, but its range is limited. We'd need to get it close to the ship." Harper stepped forward. "I'll take a team. We can use the emergency escape tunnels to get to the surface." Rodriguez considered for a moment, then nodded. "Do it. This may be our only shot." She placed a hand on Harper's shoulder. "Good luck, James. To all of you." As Harper's team prepared for their desperate mission, Samantha made last-minute adjustments to the device. The fate of humanity now rested on this hastily constructed prototype and the bravery of a handful of soldiers. The Zarkath ship loomed ever closer, its weapons charging for what could be a final devastating strike against one of humanity's last strongholds. In the underground base, breaths were held and prayers whispered. The battle for Earth's survival was about to begin in earnest. The resistance. Colonel James Harper led his small team through the winding emergency tunnels, the prototype electromagnetic device strapped securely to his back. The low rumble of the Zarkath ship above grew louder with each step, a constant reminder of the dire stakes they faced. "Remember," Harper said to his squad as they approached the tunnel's exit, "our priority is getting Dr. Chen's device in range of that ship. We hit them hard and fast, then fall back to regroup." "Clear." A chorus of affirmatives sounded from the 5 soldiers accompanying him. Each was handpicked for this mission. The best of the best, or what was left of them. As they emerged from the hidden tunnel entrance, the full might of the Zarkath invasion force became apparent. The massive ship hovered less than a kilometer away, its obsidian hull reflecting the flames of the burning forest around them. Smaller craft zipped about, scanning the area for signs of human resistance. Harper activated his comlink. "Control, this is Strike Team Alpha. We're in position. How close do we need to get?" Dr. Chen's voice crackled through the speaker. "The closer the better, Colonel. But based on our calculations, anything within 500 meters should work." Harper surveyed the scorched landscape, his mind racing through tactical options. "Copy that. We'll do our best." With hand signals, he directed his team to move out. They advanced through the underbrush, using the smoke and debris for cover. Years of training kicked in as they moved silently, avoiding detection by the patrolling Zarkath fighters. As they closed in on their target, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Harper looked up to see a Zarkath dropship descending nearby, its sides opening to disgorge a platoon of alien soldiers. "Contact," Harper hissed into his comm. "Zarkath ground forces deploying to our southeast." The alien troops were a terrifying sight. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies were covered in chitinous armor that seemed to shift and ripple with each movement. Multifaceted eyes scanned the area as they raised weapons that pulsed with an eerie green energy. Harper made a split-second decision. Change of plans. "We're activating the device now. Cover me." He unslung the prototype from his back and began powering it up. The rest of the team took up defensive positions, their weapons trained on the advancing Zarkath. Come on, Harper muttered as the device slowly hummed to life. The alien troops were closing in, their inhuman shrieks filling the air as they spotted the humans. Just as the first Zarkath raised its weapon to fire, the prototype emitted a piercing whine. A wave of invisible energy pulsed outward. The effect was immediate and stunning. The advancing Zarkath troops stumbled, their coordinated movements becoming erratic. Several dropped their weapons, clutching at their heads in apparent agony. The dropship that had deployed them lurched in the air, its engines sputtering. "It's working," Harper shouted into his comm. "The device is working." Back in the underground base, cheers erupted as they watched the feed from Harper's team. Dr. Chen let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "The electromagnetic frequency is disrupting their biology, just as we hypothesized," she explained to General Rodriguez. "But we need more power to affect the main ship." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "You heard the doctor," she barked to the personnel around her. "I want every scrap of power we can muster diverted to amplifying that signal. Now." On the battlefield, Harper's team pressed their advantage. With the Zarkath forces disoriented, they were able to push forward, taking out alien troops with precise shots. The human soldiers moved with a renewed vigor, energized by the first real victory they'd had since the invasion began. But their triumph was short-lived. A massive tremor shook the ground, nearly knocking Harper off his feet. He looked up to see the Zarkath mothership shifting position, its main cannon glowing with building energy. "They're adapting," he shouted into his comm. "We need more power now." In the base, alarms blared as they pushed their generators to the limit. "We're at maximum output," a technician called out. "Any more, and we risk a total system failure." Dr. Chen's mind raced. They were so close, but not close enough. Then an idea struck her. "The nuclear reactor," she said, turning to General Rodriguez. "If we overload it, we could create an electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to amplify our signal and take out that ship." Rodriguez's eyes widened. "That would destroy the base. We'd be exposing ourselves, losing our last secure stronghold." "If we don't do it, there won't be anything left to secure," Chen countered. For a moment, the weight of command was visible on Rodriguez's face. Then her expression hardened with resolve. "Do it." As the base erupted into frantic activity, Harper and his team continued their desperate fight on the surface. The Zarkath were recovering, their movements becoming more coordinated as they adjusted to the electromagnetic interference. "Colonel, fall back immediately." Rodriguez's voice came through his comm. "We're about to detonate the reactor. Get to minimum safe distance." Harper didn't hesitate. "Team, full retreat. Move, move, move." They ran, the prototype device clutched tightly in Harper's arms. Behind them, the Zarkath forces regrouped, their weapons finding their range once more. Energy bolts sizzled past, scorching the earth around the fleeing humans. In the base, Dr. Chen worked feverishly at her console, sensing the reactor's detonation with the prototype's frequency. "Ready on your mark, General," she called out. Rodriguez took one last look at the tactical display, confirming Harper's team had reached relative safety. "May God have mercy on us all," she murmured. Then, louder, "Do it." Chen hit the command key. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. A blinding flash of light erupted from the mountainside, followed by a shockwave that flattened trees for miles around. The electromagnetic pulse expanded outward, far more powerful than their initial attack. Harper and his team were knocked off their feet, their equipment shorting out in a shower of sparks. But as they looked up, they saw a sight that filled them with awe and hope. The Zarkath mothership, caught in the heart of the pulse, shuddered violently. Explosions rippled across its surface as systems overloaded and failed. Smaller craft fell from the sky like rain, their pilots incapacitated by the electromagnetic assault on their biology. And then, with a groan of tortured metal that seemed to shake the very air, the massive alien vessel began to fall. It crashed into the forest with earth-shattering force, carving a miles-long furrow of destruction. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, tentatively, cheers began to rise from the human survivors. They had done it. They had struck a significant blow against the seemingly invincible invaders. But their victory came at a great cost. The underground base, their last major stronghold, was gone. And the Zarkath, though wounded, were far from defeated. As the dust settled, Harper gathered his team. Their communications were down, their weapons barely functional, but they were alive, and they had hope. "All right, people," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. "We've won the battle, but the war's far from over. We need to regroup, find other survivors, and keep fighting. The Zarkath know we can hurt them now. It's time to show them what humanity can really do." With grim determination, the small band of resistance fighters set off into the ruined landscape. They carried with them the prototype device, the key to humanity's survival, and the knowledge that the tide of war had finally begun to turn. Across the globe, as news of the victory spread through hidden human enclaves, a spark of hope ignited. The resistance, once scattered and demoralized, found new purpose. The Zarkath were not invincible. They could be fought. They could be beaten. The war for Earth had entered a new phase, and humanity was ready to fight back with everything they had. The discovery. 6 months after the destruction of the Zarkath mothership, the face of the Earth had changed dramatically. The aliens, reeling from their unexpected defeat, had pulled back to fortified strongholds in major urban centers. The rest of the planet had become a battleground, with pockets of human resistance waging a relentless guerrilla war against the invaders. Dr. Samantha Chen wiped the sweat from her brow as she peered into a makeshift microscope. The lab, if it could be called that, was a far cry from her state-of-the-art facility in New York. Housed in the basement of an abandoned factory on the outskirts of what was once Chicago, it was a testament to human ingenuity and determination. "Any progress?" a voice asked from behind her. Samantha turned to see Colonel Harper enter the room. The past months had aged him visibly, a new scar running down the side of his face, but his eyes still burned with the same determination she remembered from their desperate escape from New York. "Maybe," Samantha replied, gesturing for Harper to join her at the workbench. "I've been studying the tissue samples we recovered from the downed Zarkath ship. There's something odd about their cellular structure." Harper leaned in, though the swirling patterns on the microscope's display meant little to him. "Odd how?" Samantha bit her lip, considering how to explain. "It's as if their entire biology is in a state of constant flux, not just adapting, but actively changing at a fundamental level." "Is that how they were able to start resisting our EMP weapons?" Samantha nodded. "Partly, but I think it goes deeper than that. I believe the Zarkath aren't just invaders, they're terraformers." Harper's brow furrowed. "You mean they're trying to change Earth?" "Not just Earth, themselves too." Samantha pulled up a holographic display, showing a comparison between Zarkath cellular samples from different time periods. "See how their biology has shifted since they arrived. They're not just adapting to our attacks, they're adapting to Earth itself, changing their own physiology to better suit our planet." Harper whistled low. "That's terrifying. But how does this help us?" A small smile played at the corners of Samantha's lips. "Because every adaptation has a cost. They're becoming more suited to Earth's environment, yes, but in doing so, they're losing their resistance to certain elements that were harmless to them before." She pulled up another display, this one showing a molecular structure. "This compound, for instance, it's a naturally occurring substance found in several Earth plants. 6 months ago, it had no effect on Zarkath biology. Now, it's toxic to them." Harper's eyes widened as he began to understand the implications. "So we have a new weapon?" "Potentially," Samantha cautioned. "We'd need to run more tests, figure out the most effective delivery method. But yes, this could give us a significant advantage. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of alarms blaring throughout the base. Harper immediately snapped to attention, his hand going to the weapon at his hip. "Report," he barked into his comm unit. A frantic voice responded. "Zarkaf Patrol spotted 2 clicks north of the base. They're heading this way." Harper turned to Samantha, his expression grim. "We need to move. Grab what you can and head for the evacuation point." Samantha nodded, quickly gathering her most crucial data and samples. As she worked, her mind raced. The discovery she'd made could turn the tide of the war, but only if they survived long enough to develop it into a viable weapon. They rushed through the corridors of the makeshift base, joining a stream of resistance fighters heading for the secret exit tunnels. The sound of distant explosions grew closer, punctuated by the eerie screech of Zarkaf energy weapons. Just as they reached the tunnel entrance, a massive tremor shook the building. Dust and debris rained down as part of the ceiling collapsed, blocking their escape route. "Damn it," Harper cursed, assessing the situation quickly. "We'll have to find another way out." Samantha clutched her precious samples close, her heart pounding. "The old subway tunnels," she suggested. "There's an entrance in the basement level. It might still be intact." Harper nodded. "Good thinking. Let's move." They changed course, leading the group of survivors deeper into the building's lower levels. The sounds of battle grew louder, and the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. As they descended a stairwell, a terrifying shriek echoed from above. Samantha looked up to see a Zarkaf soldier, its chitinous armor gleaming in the emergency lighting, leap down towards them. Harper reacted instantly, pushing Samantha aside and raising his weapon. He fired a burst of electromagnetic pulses, a modified version of their original weapon. The Zarkaf stumbled, its movements becoming erratic, but it didn't fall. "They've adapted more than we thought," Harper growled, switching tactics. He engaged the alien in hand-to-hand combat, his enhanced exoskeleton suit giving him the strength to match the creature's inhuman power. Samantha watched in horror as Harper grappled with the Zarkaf, their struggle a blur of motion in the cramped stairwell. Then she remembered the samples in her pack. With shaking hands, she retrieved a vial of the compound she'd been studying. It was untested, potentially dangerous, but they were out of options. "Colonel," she called out. "Catch." Harper glanced her way just long enough to see the vial arcing towards him. In one fluid motion, he caught it and smashed it against the Zarkaf's faceplate. The effect was immediate and shocking. The alien let out an ear-piercing shriek, its body convulsing violently. Before their eyes, its armor began to bubble and melt, as if being eaten away by acid. In seconds, the once fearsome warrior collapsed into a smoldering, twitching mass. Harper stared at the remains, then at Samantha, his eyes wide. "I'd say your theory is confirmed, Doctor." Samantha nodded, still shaken by the gruesome display. "We need to get this data to the other resistance cells. If we can weaponize this on a larger scale, we might just have a chance," Harper finished. He turned to address the rest of the group. "All right, people, let's move. We're not out of this yet." They pressed on, eventually reaching the old subway tunnels. As they made their way through the dark, damp passages, Samantha's mind whirled with possibilities. The Zarkaf's adaptive nature, once their greatest strength, could now be turned against them. Hours later, as they emerged from the tunnels miles away from their compromised base, Samantha gazed up at the star-filled sky. Somewhere up there, more Zarkaf ships lurked, waiting to rain death upon the earth. But for the first time since the invasion began, she felt a genuine surge of hope. They had a weapon, they had a chance, and they had the indomitable human spirit that had allowed them to survive this long against impossible odds. As dawn broke over the ruined cityscape, Samantha made a silent vow. They would drive the Zarkaf from Earth, no matter the cost. And then, perhaps, humanity would take the fight to the stars themselves. The war was far from over, but a new chapter had begun. The discovery they'd made in that makeshift lab could be the key to humanity's survival, and ultimately, their victory. Harper approached, his face etched with determination. "We need to get this information to General Rodriguez. She's coordinating a major offensive, and this could be the edge we need." Samantha nodded, her own resolve hardening. "Then let's not waste any time. We got a planet to save." As they set off towards the nearest resistance outpost, Samantha couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. In the face of near extinction, humanity had not only survived but adapted, innovated, and fought back. They had discovered the key to defeating an enemy that had seemed invincible. The next phase of the war was about to begin, and this time, Earth would be ready. The uprising. The hidden resistance base buzzed with activity as fighters and scientists prepared for what could be the turning point of the war. General Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display of the globe, red markers indicating Zarkath strongholds. "Status report," she demanded, her voice carrying the weight of command honed by years of brutal conflict. Dr. Samantha Chen stepped forward, her once pristine lab coat now a patchwork of repairs. "Production of the bioweapon is at 85% capacity, General. We've synthesized enough to target all major Zarkath strongholds simultaneously." Colonel Harper, standing at attention nearby, added, "Resistance cells worldwide are in position, awaiting the signal. Our intelligence suggests the Zarkath remain unaware of our plans." Rodriguez nodded, her eyes never leaving the holographic display. "And the delivery system?" "Ready," Samantha confirmed. "We've modified our remaining electromagnetic pulse devices to disperse the compound as an aerosol. Once released, it should incapacitate any Zarkath within a 5-mile radius." The general was silent for a moment, the weight of their impending action heavy in the air. "Very well," she said finally. "Initiate Operation Thunderstrike. May God have mercy on us all." As the command center erupted into action, Samantha felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The compound they developed was devastatingly effective against the Zarkath, but its long-term effects on Earth's ecosystem were still unknown. They were walking a razor's edge between salvation and potential ecological disaster. Harper approached her, his face grim but determined. "You should get some rest, Doc. Once this starts, there won't be time to catch our breath." Samantha shook her head. "I can't. Not now. I need to monitor the initial dispersal, make sure there are no unforeseen complications." Before Harper could argue, alarms began blaring throughout the base. A technician called out, "General, we're detecting massive energy signatures. The Zarkath are on the move." Rodriguez rushed to the console. "What? Where?" "Everywhere, Mom. It's as if every ship they have is taking off simultaneously." The general's eyes widened in realization. "They know. Somehow, they know what we're planning." She turned to the room. "Initiate Thunderstrike now. All cells, deploy immediately." Chaos erupted as the carefully laid plans dissolved into frantic action. Samantha ran to her station, inputting the final codes to activate the dispersal devices worldwide. Harper was already sprinting towards the hangar, shouting orders to his team. Around the globe, hidden resistance fighters emerged from the shadows, activating the devices that would release the bioweapon into the atmosphere. In New York, Paris, Tokyo, and 100 other cities, plumes of invisible mist began to rise. The Zarkath response was immediate and terrifying. Their ships, which had remained largely stationary since establishing their strongholds, now filled the skies. Energy weapons lanced down, targeting known and suspected resistance locations with deadly precision. In the command center, Samantha watched in horror as red dots representing their forces winked out one by one. "This is wrong," she muttered, her fingers flying over her keyboard. "The dispersal isn't having the expected effect. It's as if." Her voice trailed off as the realization hit her. "They've adapted again. General," she called out, "the Zarkath, They've developed a resistance to the compound. Our weapons are useless. Rodriguez's face hardened. How is that possible? Your tests were on older samples, Samantha finished, her mind racing. They must have detected our research somehow, found a way to alter their biology faster than we anticipated. For a moment, the command center fell silent, the weight of their failure pressing down on them. Then, Harper's voice crackled over the comms. This is Strike Team Alpha. We're pinned down in London. The bioweapon had no effect. Repeat, no effect. Requesting immediate evac. Rodriguez made a decision. All teams, fall back to secondary positions. This is not a retreat, people. We regroup, we reassess, we fight on. As the resistance forces worldwide scrambled to escape the Zarkath onslaught, Samantha felt a crushing sense of despair. They had risked everything on this attack, and it had failed spectacularly. Hours passed in a blur of frantic communications and desperate strategizing. Reports trickled in from around the world, each worse than the last. Resistance cells were being wiped out, safe houses discovered, carefully hidden bases destroyed. It was nearly dawn when Harper returned, his armor scorched and dented. He found Samantha in her lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing the compound's molecular structure. How bad is it? She asked without looking up. Harper sighed heavily. Bad. We've lost nearly 70% of our forces. The Zarkath are pushing hard, taking territory we've held for months. Samantha closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. This is my fault. I should have anticipated their ability to adapt so quickly. Hey, Harper said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. You couldn't have known. None of us could. But we're not beaten yet. She looked up at him, searching for any sign of hope. What can we possibly do now? They've countered our best weapon. They're stronger than ever. Her voice cut off as her eyes fell on one of the displays. There, hidden in the complex web of molecular bonds, was something she'd missed before. Wait a minute, she murmured, her fingers flying over the keyboard. This doesn't make sense. The way they've adapted, it's too perfect. Too engineered. Harper leaned in. What are you saying? Samantha's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. They didn't just adapt naturally. They must have gotten hold of our research, used it to create a targeted defense. But in doing so, they've introduced a new vulnerability. She quickly pulled up a simulation, showing how the Zarkath's latest adaptation interacted with Earth's atmosphere. Look, their new biology is incredibly efficient in our environment, but it's also unstable. If we could find a way to disrupt the balance. Harper caught on quickly. We could trigger a cascading failure in their entire population. Exactly, Samantha nodded, excitement building in her voice. We'd need to alter the atmosphere somehow, introduce a catalyst on a global scale. And how exactly do we do that? Harper asked. Samantha was quiet for a moment, her mind working through the problem. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. We use their own technology against them. Those terraforming engines they've been building. We hijack them, reprogram them to disperse our catalyst instead. Harper stared at her, a mix of awe and trepidation on his face. That's incredibly dangerous, and we'd need to get access to their most heavily guarded installations. It's insane, Samantha agreed. But it might be our last chance. Just then, General Rodriguez entered the lab, her face haggard but her eyes still burning with determination. Please tell me you have something, Doctor. Anything. Samantha and Harper exchanged a look, then turned to the general. We might have a plan, Samantha said, but you're not going to like it. As they explained their audacious scheme, Rodriguez's expression shifted from skepticism to grim resolve. When they finished, she was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. It's a long shot, probably suicide. But right now, a long shot is better than no shot at all. She straightened, her voice taking on the tone of command. All right, people, let's save the world. As the resistance mobilized for what could be their final mission, Samantha felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had been pushed to the brink, but they weren't beaten yet. Humanity still had one last card to play. The uprising had faltered, but from its ashes, a new hope was born. The final battle for Earth was about to begin. The counterattack. The plan was audacious, borderline insane. But as General Rodriguez often said, desperate times called for desperate measures. And times had never been more desperate for the human race. Dr. Samantha Chen stood in the makeshift briefing room, addressing a group of the Resistance's best soldiers and scientists. Colonel Harper stood at her side, his presence a reassuring constant in the chaos of war. "The Zarkath terraforming engines are our targets," Samantha explained, gesturing to a holographic display of the massive alien structures. "There are 5 of them, strategically placed around the globe. We need to capture all of them simultaneously." Harper took over. "Each team will be responsible for infiltrating a terraforming site, neutralizing the Zarkath defenders, and holding the position long enough for our tech experts to reprogram the engines. And once we have control," Samantha continued, "we'll use the engines to disperse our catalyst into the atmosphere. If my calculations are correct, it should trigger a chain reaction in the Zarkath biology, essentially causing their adapted systems to break down rapidly." A grizzled soldier in the back spoke up. "And if your calculations aren't correct, Doc?" Samantha met his gaze steadily. "Then we've likely doomed ourselves along with the Zarkath. But it's a risk we have to take." General Rodriguez stepped forward. "I won't lie to you. This mission is likely a one-way trip for most of us. But it's our last chance to take back our planet. Are you with me?" The room erupted in a chorus of determined affirmatives. As the briefing concluded, and the teams began their final preparations, Harper pulled Samantha aside. "You should stay here," he said, his voice low. "Coordinate from the command center. We'll need your expertise if anything goes wrong with the reprogramming." Samantha shook her head. "No. I need to be on site to make any necessary adjustments. Besides," she added with a grim smile, "if this fails, there won't be anywhere safe left on Earth anyway." Harper looked like he wanted to argue, but nodded instead. "All right. You're with me then. Let's go save the world." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Stealth shuttles, cobbled together from salvaged human and Zarkath technology, carried the strike teams to their targets. As they approached the North American terraforming engine, Samantha felt her heart racing. Everything hinged on this moment. Their shuttle landed silently in a forested area a mile from the alien structure. As they disembarked, the sheer scale of the terraforming engine became apparent. It towered above the landscape, a twisted spire of alien metal reaching into the clouds. Harper's voice came through their comms. "All teams in position. Commence operation on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." They moved swiftly through the underbrush, electromagnetic pulse rifles at the ready. The perimeter defenses were formidable, but the element of surprise was on their side. EMPs took out the first wave of Zarkath sentries before they could raise the alarm. But their luck couldn't last forever. As they breached the outer defenses, a piercing alarm filled the air. Zarkath warriors poured out of the structure, their weapons blazing with deadly energy. "Push forward," Harper shouted over the din of battle. "We have to reach the control center." Samantha found herself in the thick of the fight, her scientific knowledge now secondary to the brutal necessities of combat. She fired her weapon with grim determination, each shot a silent prayer for Earth's survival. They fought their way through winding corridors, the alien architecture disorienting and hostile. Casualties mounted on both sides, the air thick with the acrid smell of weapons fire and the inhuman shrieks of dying Zarkath. Finally, they reached the central control room. Harper and his remaining soldiers formed a defensive perimeter while Samantha and the tech team got to work. "How long?" Harper asked, his voice tense as he fired another burst at the approaching Zarkath reinforcements. 10 minutes, Samantha replied, her fingers flying over the alien console. "Maybe less if we're lucky." "We'll buy you all the time we can," Harper said grimly. The next few minutes were a nightmare of desperate combat and frantic coding. Samantha's world narrowed to the strange symbols on the screen before her, trusting Harper and the others to keep her alive long enough to finish. Just as the defense perimeter was about to collapse, a triumphant cry came from one of the techs. "We're in. System's ours." Samantha wasted no time. With a few final commands, she activated the reprogrammed terraforming engine. The entire structure hummed with power, and outside, a strange mist began to rise into the atmosphere. "All teams, report in," Harper barked into his comm. One by one, the other strike teams confirmed their success. Against all odds, they had done it. All 5 terraforming engines were now working for humanity. As the catalyst dispersed into the air, its effect on the Zarkath was immediate and horrifying. The alien warriors began to convulse, their adapted biology turning against them. In minutes, the attacking force had crumbled. Samantha stared at the screens in disbelief. "It's working. My God, it's actually working." Reports flooded in from around the globe. Zarkath ships were falling from the sky, their pilots incapacitated. Strongholds that had seemed impregnable mere hours ago now fell silent. In the days that followed, the full scale of their victory became clear. The Zarkath invasion force had been utterly decimated. Those few that survived were no longer a threat, their biology too weakened to pose any danger. 2 weeks after the operation, now dubbed Salvation Day by the media, Samantha stood with Harper and Rodriguez on the steps of the partially rebuilt White House. Before them, a sea of humanity cheered, celebrating their hard-won freedom. Rodriguez stepped up to the microphone. "Today, we honor the sacrifices of those who fell in our struggle for survival. We remember the billions lost to the invasion, but we also look to the future. Humanity has faced its greatest challenge and emerged victorious. We have reclaimed our world." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. "But our journey is not over. The stars that once brought us terror now beckon with possibility. We have inherited the Zarkath's advanced technology, their interstellar ships. The universe lies open before us." Samantha felt a shiver run down her spine as Rodriguez continued. "We go to the stars not as conquerors, but as explorers. We go to ensure that no other world suffers as ours did. We go to forge alliances, to seek knowledge, and yes, to protect ourselves from future threats." The general's voice rose to a crescendo. "Humanity will never again be helpless victims. We will never again be unprepared. From this day forward, we claim our place among the stars." The crowd's roar was deafening. Samantha turned to Harper, seeing her own mix of exhaustion, pride, and anticipation mirrored in his eyes. "So," Harper said with a slight smile, "ready for another adventure?" Samantha laughed, feeling truly lighthearted for the first time in years. "Always. The universe won't know what hit it." As they looked up at the sky, no longer a source of fear, but a canvas of endless possibility, both knew that humanity's greatest chapter was just beginning. They had faced extinction and emerged stronger, more united, and with an unshakable determination to forge their own destiny among the stars. The human era of galactic exploration had begun, and the universe would never be the same.